Hello, and welcome to the virtual Scandinavia House in New York and today's book talk, The Employees with Olga Ravn and translated by Martin Aitken. The Employees is currently out in translation from Lolli Editions and is shortlisted for the 2021 International Booker Prize, which the winner will be announced on June 2nd. Feel free to ask questions to the panelists in the chat function. I will also put a link to where you can purchase the book. Lolli is offering free shipping if you purchase a book from their website. You just need to add the code AMSCAN at checkout. The panel is being recorded and made available on our website at scandinaviahouse.org, as well as our YouTube page. Moderating today's program is Katrine Øgaard Jensen. She is a writer and translator from the Danish. She is a recipient of several fellowships and awards, including the Danish Arts Foundation's Young Artistic Elite Fellowship in 2020, as well as the 2019 National Translation Award in Poetry for a translation of Ursula Andkjær Olsen's book-length poem, Third Millennial Heart. She teaches creative writing and literary translation at Columbia University, where she served as the acting director of the literary translation at Columbia from 2019 to 2020. Her translation of Ursula Andkjær Olsen's Outgoing Vessel is now out from Action Book. So please welcome Katrine.
Thank you, Kyle, for organizing this and so many other excellent literary events at Scandinavia House. I'm excited and honored to be here today with International Booker Prize finalists Olga Ravn and Martin Aitken. So I'm going to start by briefly introducing the author and translator, and then they're going to do a reading from the employees, and afterwards we'll have a discussion about the book. And finally, Kyle will lead a Q&A with any audience questions that will come in via the chat. So please feel free to write in any questions that you have. So Olga Ravn is a Danish novelist and poet. Her novel Celestine appeared to critical acclaim in 2015. She's also a literary critic and has written for Politiken and several other Danish publications. Alongside Johanne Lykke-Holm, she runs the feminist performance group and writing school Hekseskolen. And Martin Aitken has translated numerous novels from Danish and Norwegian, including works by Karl Ove Knausgård, Peter Høeg, Ida Jessen, and Kim Leine. He was a finalist at the US National Book Awards in 2018 and received the PEN America Translation Prize in 2019 for his translation of Hanne Ørstavik's Love. So thank you, Olga and Martin, for being here with us today, and I look forward to hearing your read.
Thanks for inviting us. Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. I will just begin with reading a short text from this book, the Danish version of The Employees, and then Martin will take over and do the English translation, and we will do that with 3 short testimonies. Vidneudsagn 041. Det jeg savner mest derhjemmefra er at shoppe. Det er lidt fjollet, det ved jeg godt. Hvis jeg ikke kunne forstå, at noget skulle ske, for eksempel da jeg fik jobbet her, så gik jeg ud og shoppede til afrejsen, og på den måde forstod jeg, at det virkelig skulle ske. Jeg forstod de kommende begivenheder gennem indkøbet. Jeg forstod omstændighederne gennem de ting, der kendetegnede dem. At shoppe havde en næsten bedøvende effekt på mig. Og siden jeg holdt op med det, er jeg begyndt at have tanker og følelser, som har vist sig at være sørgelige.
Statement 041. What I miss most from home is shopping. It sounds a bit silly, I know. If ever I couldn't grasp that something was happening, like when I got the job here and departure time was coming up, I'd go out and buy stuff in preparation for it. And it helped me understand it was for real. I understood impending events through shopping. I understood the circumstances through the items that characterized them. Shopping had a kind of numbing effect on me. And now that it's no longer something I do, I've started having thoughts and feelings that have turned out to be sad.
Vidneudsagn 026. Duften i rummet har vilje og intention. Det er lugten af noget gammelt i forrådnelse, noget hengemt. Det er som om lugten vil starte den samme proces i mig, at jeg skal blive en gren for at kunne afbrækkes, rådne og forsvinde.
Statement 026. The fragrance in the room has will and intention. It's the smell of something old and decomposing, something musty. It's as if the smell wishes to initiate the same process in me, that I become a branch to break off, rot, and be gone.
Vidneudsagn 022. Man har fortalt mig, at der er problemer med mit emotionelle reaktionsmønster. At man oplever, at jeg ikke kan udføre min opgave korrekt på grund af visse følelsers utilpassede funktion. Jeg kommer i rummene hver dag. Jeg har aldrig været andre steder end på det 6.000. skib. Jeg skal træne min kognitive fleksibilitet, hvis jeg skal kunne indgå i besætningen på lige fod med dem, der fødes. Er dette problem menneskeligt? I så fald vil jeg gerne beholde det.
Statement 022. I've been told there are problems with my emotional reaction pattern. They tell me I can't carry out my work correctly due to functional maladjustments with respect to certain feelings. I'm in the rooms every day. I've never been anywhere else apart from the 6,000 ship. I need to train my cognitive flexibility if I'm to be in the crew on an equal footing with those who were born. Is this a human problem? If so, I'd like to keep it.
All right, thank you very much. So before we start the discussion, I think I just want to read the description of the book real quick for those who maybe just tuned in, not knowing what it's about. So the crew of the 6,000 ship consists of those who were born and those who were made, those who will die and those who will not. When the ship takes on a number of strange objects from the planet New Discovery, the crew is perplexed to find itself becoming deeply attached to them, and human and humanoid employees alike start aching for the same things: warmth and intimacy, loved ones who have passed, shopping and child rearing, our shared faraway Earth, which now only persists in memory. Gradually, the crew members come to see their work in a new light, and each employee is compelled to ask themselves whether they can carry on as before and what it means to be truly living. And so I want to start by saying how much I admire this book and both of you in general. At Columbia University, I teach a class called Science Fiction Poetics in the creative writing program. And before this book had found a publisher in English, I actually went to the Danish publisher Gyldendal's website to get the English sample translation so I could read some pages from it with my students in class. And the sample alone inspired me to teach an entire class on future workforces. And so my first question here is for Olga. In writing this novel, what did you want to explore about the general idea of a workforce and the more individual relationships between co-workers?
Well, thank you so much for your kind words. That's a big and very interesting question. Well, I think, well, something that I knew that I wanted to do was that I wanted to write a book where the main character was not an individual. And I wanted to write about a group, and the group that is, I think, mostly represented in literary fiction. A new term I have recently learned from this Booker thing is the family, or the nuclear family as group is something that we're used to read in novels. But actually, I thought that the workforce or our colleagues is a group that we spend just as much time with. And I realized that there was a lot, at least I had an office job at the time, and there was just so much tension, so many unsaid things in this office that I thought was really interesting. And we started having these conversations with our superiors about our efficiency, and I was just obsessed with this language because I found it like to be the most scaring technology ever. And at the same time, I also realized that I was doing a lot of emotional labor, that actually being in a workforce is like being in a family. There are certain people you are close to, there are other people you don't like. You have to check in on people, and this was an emotional landscape or whatever that I thought was very important and very inspiring. It felt also a little new.
Mm-hmm.
In Denmark, we have a tradition from the 70s that was like very basic communist left-wing thing with workplace novels that was really looked down upon after the 70s, because apparently everybody was traumatized by the 70s in Denmark. So I also thought that combining science fiction with like workplace novel was two of like the most bad taste things you could do. And I thought that would be fun.
All right, thank you. And you mentioned the sort of corporate language, and my next question is for Martin, because there is a lot of corporate lingo in the book, spoken by humans and humanoids alike. Did you do any particular research to brush up on this kind of corporate language? I know you used to teach at Copenhagen Business School, so maybe you could just naturally switch to business mode when writing these voices, or did you look up any supporting materials for inspiration?
Well, in my defense, I'd say that when I did have university tenure at the Copenhagen Business School, but that was the time when there was actually a faculty of languages attached to the Copenhagen Business School for all sorts of historical reasons. So I didn't actually have anything to do with the business side of the Copenhagen Business School. But that was the first thing, when you started talking about this, that was the first thing I thought of. Because I mean, I was lucky enough to get out of the university environment. So unfortunately, you're still trapped there, Katrine. But I got out in well, it would be 12, 13 years ago, I suppose, when I wanted to start translating instead. But I do remember at that time that this sort of corporate speak had really invaded everything. And also increased our workload immensely, because we were having to go to these talks with our heads of department every 3 months or something to see how we were getting on, and everything was couched in these business terms, which of course came in from the other faculty as well. So there was a lot of sort of one-way pollination in that respect. But apart from that, no, I mean, I did recall that kind of language, but I haven't been exposed to it myself since I got out. And I, you know, I work at home. I work for myself, freelancing, so I'm not exposed to it. But of course, it shines through the prose in Olga's book, and obviously it was something that I was very keen to replicate as best I could. Yeah.
But you didn't use any supporting text, like you didn't go to like the website of a major corporation to see how they like, you know, have their mission statement written or something like that.
Well, that's the kind of thing that you often do as a translator, but I can't remember whether I did or not. I don't think I did, but I may have done. But yeah, I mean,
it's in your blood at that point, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we translators are really good at Googling. We Google everything.
Exactly. All right, thank you. And Olga, you mentioned blending science fiction with the workplace novel. What extra thematic dimensions and artistic freedoms are added when you bring the workplace novel into the 22nd century? And what interests you more broadly about science fiction as a genre?
Okay, so that's actually 2 questions.
Mm-hmm. I do that a lot.
Well, let me see if I can combine, like make one answer. Well, I've been very interested in genre as a writer and also as a reader, and have always had problems with like institutionalized good tastes, I guess, because I often got the impression that I myself was not invited, or maybe that's not true. Well, I loved a lot of writers, for example, Tove Ditlevsen, that is being translated now, growing up and as a young woman, and she was considered bad taste for a lot of time in Denmark, and I was just such a good student that I thought that loving her meant that I was bad taste myself. And so in the beginning, when I started to like really write, I realized that each time I tried to live up to the expectations of, I don't really know, just like some sense of the good normal book that I think we all have, it would just really fall flat and it would not express my experience. And at some point, I can't really remember the specific time, but at some point I just realized that if I move in the outskirts of literary tradition and take notes from these genres, something happens with my writing. Actually, it's better, or it does what I wanted to do. So my first novel was inspired by like Gothic novels. So science fiction was an obvious choice to do next. And I think that science fiction is a genre that is very much about technology, of course, but also about how we make tools of things, how we make resources of things, and what that tells us about ourselves. And I think that the impression or the idea of the human as being the center of the world, or like the commander of the elements, that I know we've loved for a long time, a couple of 100 years, maybe 1,000, is, I think it is inherently critiqued in science fiction, because there is something in the genre about the tools turning on the masters or the creators of the tools. And so I think actually in science fiction there is also some sense of seeing the thing for being the thing itself. And I took a lot of notes from Ursula K. Le Guin, which is one of my heroes, and she does this. She's like has like an anthropologist. Father was an anthropologist, I guess it's called. So she does the same thing, but often with like groups of people, like what happens if we instrumentalize other bodies? And so combining this with the workforce became pretty obvious to me, because this efficiency and human resources language is a tool like everything else. But what happens is that we, in the process of using these tools and this technology of the modern workforce, we make ourselves or the employees tools. So it's like a humanizing aspect. That was a very long answer.
It was
I'm
a
sorry.
really good question. Yeah.
Yes.
They're getting longer though. But Martin, one short one for you. You're an extremely sought after translator of literary fiction in Denmark. In fact, I don't think I'm hurting anyone's feelings if I say you're the most sought after translator. This means that you pretty much get to pick and choose exactly which projects you wish to take on. And out of all the books and samples you could have translated, what compelled you to first do a sample translation of the employees and to later translate the entire novel?
I don't actually know if I did do a sample translation, but I did translate some excerpts from the book, which came out in a magazine, and maybe that
that's what I mean.
Uses a sample translation, right? Okay. But the reason I said yes to do that was because I'd read the book and I was completely bowled over by it. I mean, the whole experimental form of it, and it does. I haven't actually read that much Ursula K. Le Guin, but while we were waiting to come on, I was actually reading this, which is a Danish version of something she wrote called The Author of the Acacia Seeds. It's about 16 pages and it's absolutely brilliant. But I don't really know that much Le Guin, but I was instantly reminded of Le Guin when I read The Employees, and other stuff as well by Philip K. Dick. And although I've read few of his, I've read the one that you're supposed to read and that everybody's read, the androids and their dreaming electric sheep and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I was knocked over by it, and the whole surreal sort of feeling of the piece. We don't really know what's going on until we're some way into the book, and this gradual sense of this growing feeling of immense loneliness, which of course, I mean, the setting is absolutely brilliant. I mean, we're drifting around in a black hole or in outer space or whatever, and this is all we've got. So, I mean, it was very much the feeling of the piece that drew me towards it. And it progressed from there, basically. But I mean, I do also do stuff. I mean, you say that I may be in such a position as to sort of say no to all sorts of work and everything. But of course, I mean, I'm not the kind of person. I've never pitched a translation to a publisher because I basically wouldn't know what to do. I'd do it all wrong and I'd mess everything up. Sure. So, you know, I tend to be working on a book, and I'll get other offers coming in, and very often I'll say yes if I like the book sufficiently. But that wouldn't rule out me doing a crime novel all of a sudden if needs be, you know, or some other kind of genre fiction. But, yeah, but I was absolutely knocked out by The Employees, and still am. I mean, doing these very short readings here, I mean, it just I don't normally go back to my own work. I hate sort of going back and skimming through the pages, because I just look at things that, you know, if I could get the chance, I'd do them differently. That's always the feeling I get, and it's probably the feeling that authors get as well. But it's really nice to come back to this and to read from it, which is, it's always nice reading from your work, actually. I really enjoy that. It's the answering all the tricky questions about it that gets me.
All right, Olga, here comes a very long question for you. So the entire narrative of The Employees revolves around these strange objects from the planet New Discovery, and how the crew of the 6000 ship becomes attached to them and sort of emotionally awakened by them. When I read the book, these objects were so abstract or alien to me that they made me think of H.P. Lovecraft's short story, The Call of Cthulhu, in the way where you have this incomprehensible organism or being that can't fully be described. But where Cthulhu is a creation of cosmic horror, there is a lot of tenderness to the objects in The Employees. And I'm getting to my point now, I promise. For those attending this event who haven't read the book, and maybe also for those who have read it, such as myself, could you try to describe a couple of your favorite objects from the book, and maybe also let us know what inspired the creation of them?
Yes, what a great question. Well, there's two parts in this question, because one is very basic, that I was approached by a young Danish artist called Lea Guldette Hesterlund that wanted me to write something for her first solo show. And I went to her studio and I saw her sculptures, and I was just completely inspired by them immediately. So a lot of the objects, at least in the beginning of the book, are directly inspired by her sculptures, but it was the deal between me and Lea that I could describe things that wasn't there. Actually, she what do you say? She wanted me to, or she encouraged me to do it, and I began sending her testimonies and she began also altering some of her stuff from what I was writing, so it was going back and forth. And then at some point I realized that, to me at least, it wasn't as important anymore how the object looked, but how the meeting was between the employee and the object. So for me, one of the very clear, distinct visions I have is, at some point, I can't remember the exact English translation, but one of the employees finds an object in like a creek or like a klippesprække. I don't know what to say it. In like, you know, there's a rock and then there's a hole in the rock. He puts his head in there. And I think at the time, for me also personally, it was important to meditate on stuff that's not useful. And like just try to examine this thought that everything needs to be of use, like all movement, all thought, all action needs to be of use. So I wanted these objects to be something that's not of use and have a great time with it. And yeah, so that's my answer.
Okay. Thank you. And Martin, what was it like translating these obscure object descriptions? Did you try to decide what the objects look like to you, or did you more just try to focus on translating the descriptions on a line level without trying to sort of materialize the objects in your head?
Yeah, but you can't actually do that, can you? I mean, it's really, really difficult, because what are we actually translating? We're not just translating words on a page. I mean, all this is like meta representation, isn't it? I mean, we're translators, but we're readers as well. So we read the words on the page and we represent them mentally somewhere. So what we're actually translating probably is somewhere up here, and we need those images in a way. So that was like really tricky, trying to get a handle on these objects, the way they're described, and trying to visualize them in order to make the translation credible, rather than just a sort of verbatim word for word sort of thing. But the way they're described is like really abstract, and of course they're abstract, these objects themselves, even though they're tangible to the characters, the humans and the humanoids. But of course, I mean, I read the little introduction to the book where Olga thanks Leah. And of course, that sent me on to Leah's work. And fortunately, you were able to Google probably that same exhibition. Actually, I've probably been around there. I didn't see the exhibition in person, but I've seen some of the objects on the internet. Mm-hmm. And that helps. That gives you a really nice sort of, it sets things up nicely for how you're going to sort of transpose these things into language. But yeah, it was, I mean, the abstraction of these weird objects were really, really tricky. Yeah.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Yes, but because it's so interesting to me that a lot of readers have asked us, me and Martin, and also, this question about like what about the objects? They're so hard to like imagine, and I find that interesting because I don't really care. No. And it's not that it's not planned, but for me, it's much more important for me that it's like a presence. It's like the feeling of a presence. And I wanted to describe that, and the book is also actually very interested in like the line between something that is material and something that is not. So I worked a lot with scent and smells in the book, because is that a thing? I mean, we definitely sense it, and it's particles, but it doesn't necessarily have like what we understand as a body or like material. And I think that in order to make like an examination or critique of some of this workforce technology, I had to like point to things that exist that not necessarily have what we would consider a form. Like language could be an example. That's definitely a thing. But how does it look?
Yeah.
I mean,
I think generally as well. I mean, describing a work of art is a very, very difficult thing to do, and works of art will affect us in certain ways, which is what happens in the book. I mean, the crew become drawn to these objects. The objects do something to them. They impact on them in some way, and to describe what a work of art does is, and even what it looks like, is immensely difficult. That's probably why a lot of writing about art is so unintelligible and so difficult
that's so true.
to understand. There's a very particular kind of language, and I remember actually that I was once asked if I'd do some sort of catalogue text for an exhibition here in the town where I live, and it was probably the most difficult thing I've ever had to do. I mean, I really felt that I couldn't do it because I didn't master the language, that very particular language that they use in order to describe art. So
it's a lot like corporate lingo. It just is its own version of it.
Yeah.
There's always like this idea of like the space between, like interrogating the space between X and Y or something like that. Yeah. All right. I'm also very interested in the structure of the book. So it's made up of a series of witness statements compiled by a workplace commission, and each witness statement is very short, usually either a short paragraph or a page. The statements themselves are fragmented further with great leaps between thoughts and redacted sections. Olga, what made you decide on this form for the book?
Well, as I will start by saying that as a writer, you don't like sit down and decide on a specific form. It kind of also grows, but I saw these little interviews with astronauts. They were just being elected by NASA, and they were all just so loyal and so happy. And there was just something about these little sound bites of people representing their workplace that I thought was immensely interesting, and I liked very much like that I could work with the tension and on what wasn't said. And I also kind of liked that I had to begin over with each text, and then it slowly built. And then, of course, like one of the main reasons was that I wanted to write something that would make the reader identify with a thing that was not human. And I didn't want to write like, I am a jug on a table. Look at me seeing the humans. Like that would just be silly. So I wanted to do it in a way where you hear a voice and you don't really know all the time, is this a human being speaking, or is it something that is using human language? And where is the line? So and yeah, I guess each statement is also lost in space, actually, quite literally. So it was also a way to like mimic how I imagine it is living in a spaceship for the rest of your life. But it's always I always feel a little bit awkward explaining form. I would like the form to speak for itself mostly. Yeah.
If I could just add there, one of the really fascinating things about the book, about the formal structure of it, is that these very short passages, they come to resemble the objects that the 6,000
Exactly.
is carrying in a way. I mean, they're very sort of, they're very well defined, and you can almost pick them up and touch them. I really, really like that.
Yeah, well, I definitely, thank you. And I had, when I looked at, and I still get that feeling when I see what Leah is working now at the studio, I'm like, oh, I could have written 100 pages more. Each time I look at her stuff, I have the feeling like, it's like I dreamt it. I know what it is, but I can't remember. And each time I would look down and I would go around the studio and she would send me pictures and I would write down like a sentence, like it looks like a wet newspaper. And then I would look up again and it would look completely different. So I got the impression that her sculptures were like shapeshifters. And I really wanted the book to be the same way. So there are very many different like roads through the book that you could take when you read it.
Mm-hmm. And speaking to that, Martin, so I personally translate poetry because I love the immediate rewards of finishing a short piece, but also the puzzle of connecting the dots between the lines is a fun writing challenge for me. So what challenges and or rewards did the fragmented style of this novel bring about in translation?
Yeah, well, I think, you're onto something there. I mean, the very sort of the brief nature of the things is something that I like as well. Although a lot of my other work at the moment is like 700-page novels and something. But I like that sort of I like the brevity of these pieces. But at the same time, they were really difficult because when pieces are as short as that, everything becomes very much very sort of sentence oriented, and you're really using these short sentences. These are your units of translation, whatever translation theory calls them these days. Whereas in the sort of more sweeping narrative novel, it's a bigger thing altogether. So you're very focused on each sentence, and it's like I think I said somewhere else, it's like going from one little box to the next little box to the next little box, and then you get this sort of lack of connectors between the sentences, and I think you said yourself, I mean, there are these leaps all of a sudden onto something completely different within the very next sentence is about something completely different, and that's I mean, you have to have your wits about you in some way or another. You have to be very focused at that level, and it's both difficult, but it's rewarding. It's rewarding when it works, and I don't always think that everything I do works, but in some instances it does. Flicking, doing our readings before, I thought, oh, that's really nice. That was you don't want to let the author down. So, yeah, but yeah, I like doing short stuff, but it has its demands, and I like doing the long stuff as well because it's a different way of going about things.
So you've already mentioned that the employee starts out with this acknowledgement to the artist Lea Hestelund, stating that the book would not have existed without her installations and sculptures. Olga, I also recently saw on your Instagram that you are obsessed with an old clock. I think it was
Yes.
a Danish church or something. And it made me wonder if you're often inspired by visual art or objects in your writing, and if so, what are some other objects that have served as inspiration to you?
Oh, what a wonderful question. Yes, I am very much, as you can see, a collector of things. And I think actually at the core of everything I write, there is like I want to understand what a thing is, and what a thing is a vessel of, in some way. And right now I'm very interested in, well, visual arts. Visual arts is a lot of things. When I worked with the employees, I was inspired by Leah, and then how should I answer this? I do a lot of research. I love researching, and I would like the period, my research period, to be as long as possible, not knowing what I'm doing at all. So like writing someone in a small town an hour away from Copenhagen, I heard that you have this moon clock from 1500, can I come and see it? It's just, and I can't really tell you if it will ever end up in a book, but I think that things are alive and that they are filled with stories. And I'm very much interested in what a thing or an object hides. I think there's like this French poet called Claude Réouet-Chonneau, and he says that the objects, now I have to translate it, intain the infinity. So this pair of oppositions we have between thing and human interests me a lot. Things like objects go very deep into me. Like I can be very overstimulated by taking a ride on my bike. And right now I'm trying to learn the names of all the plants where I live. So it's like almost impossible to go outside because my brain is just, oh, that's that plant and this plant. So I guess that's it. That's just, it's always been like that. I guess it will always continue to be like that. So I'm not, so to answer your question shortly, well, yes, visual arts definitely is an inspiration to me, but more so is just things, objects.
All right, so I want to just like, I'm going to keep asking you guys questions, but I just want to remind the audience that if you have any questions for Olga or Martin, you can write it into the chat box. So I'm going to keep going until someone asks a question that I get to speak. Martin, aesthetically speaking, what sets Olga's writing style apart from other writers you've translated? Is there anything we haven't discussed that you personally admire about her writing on a sentence level, either as a reader or translator or both?
Blimey, yeah. Well, we're back to this sort of brevity kind of thing, and the sheer amount of poetry that she can get out of such short sentences is a really lovely thing without actually writing poetry. There's that sort of very lyrical quality, and at the same time as her sentences are very, I mean, she writes sort of very plain, sort of everyday language, and there's not sort of all sorts of embellishments, and yet this poetry comes through, obviously as a function of what she's talking about more generally and the more general context of the book, but she manages to really bring forth this immense sort of feeling of this atmosphere of endless loneliness and yearning out of these very small and very simple everyday sentences, and that's something I think is really fabulous.
And I see we have a question now from an audience.
Thank you, Martin.
So Matthew in the audience asks, I really liked the way in which the employees didn't only critique the futuristic workplace, but also seemed to affirm certain possibilities within it. What, if any, are the positive sides of work in the employees?
Ooh. Well, I think that work is very important, and that it can be immensely enjoyable, and that it can give you a sense of meaning and belonging. That is very important. And I'm actually, this clock that I showed you now is from 1589. And so I'm actually very interested also in how groups used to work together, for example, in the end of the Middle Ages, where you would belong to a farm or house or a person that's not so good, but there would be groups of people working, and work made sense in a different way. And I love working. And as a woman that has given birth to 2 children and taken my share of maternity leave, I am very interested in what we consider work, and what is awarded work, with like money or respect and status. So to examine or look upon what work is, and I don't think that, I think that the employees is sort of like, I've said this before, like an inkblot for the reader, because someone will think it's dystopian and others will read it as an like utopia. But definitely, even though the committee in the book wants to separate each employee as to, so they're only loyal towards the committee, the sense of being a group and having communion is so strong. And I don't think you can put people together with and not have that arise. And that's actually what like this human resource language and efficiency and corporate stuff you're talking about, it's trying to, like the cubicle, like dividing everyone in their small cubicle. And so, yeah, unions is where I'm going, I guess. At one point, I actually considered that the employees should go on strike in the book, but then I realized that it wouldn't work in this logic at all. But there's definitely a sense of like who owns the production and stuff like that.
If I can just say something, it's what I think is really striking about the book in our present situation is that the way we relate to our work in the sort of the black hole of COVID is that we've become detached from our work. We work remotely at the same time as our work it's come into our homes now. It's not just workplaces, so there's a kind of duality going on there. And this was something I when I reread the book, it was like this. It really impacted me against the background of what we've been going through for the last year and a half or so. It took on another dimension for me, and it really resonated in another way, which obviously wasn't intended specifically because the book was written before COVID, but the idea of we're detached, we're floating around in space, but at the same time our work is very much, even more so, a part of us now than it was, at least for some of us who work remotely. It's even more a part of us now than it was before. And it's sort of kind of the thing about being stuck on this ship floating in space where all you've got is your work. It really resonated again. Yeah.
I think that something we haven't touched upon, but that I would like to just say something about here, is that people will talk about there is like this regime of growth, like on a global scale, and of course our work and how we work and how work is a part of our lives. It's a part of this idea of a constant growth that is definitely ruining the planet but also our relations to each other. So actually, what I thought was important to put into the employees was this sense of having lost your connection to Earth or having been taken away from your ecology, and not really understanding what your own ecology is and how to meet it or use it. And I think that this global pandemic has really, shown us that we have really lost touch with our own ecology. So yeah, that was just what I
And
wanted
this
to
is
say.
this of course is only the first pandemic of many pandemics to come. I fear very much.
And yes, you're probably right. And I think that it's possible that work can make you bond with your own ecology, not only by working with like land especially, but with people and with each other and with stuff that makes sense. And I think that I paid attention to how many people in isolation and quarantine during this pandemic wanted to build a relationship with a living thing. So a lot of people started to get into plants or like sourdough stuff and knitting with wool. Like a lot of people actually needed very tactile material experiences to like ground them. So yeah, it was really interesting to see those trends rise up.
Taking your sourdough for a walk.
I also just wanted to briefly answer Rona's question, which was, which H.P. Lovecraft book did you mention? So it was the short story, The Call of Cthulhu, that I mentioned. And then we have one question from Åse for Olga. Would you kindly compare or contrast your love of Tove Ditlevsen and admiration for Ursula Le Guin?
Yeah, wow. Okay, yes. What an interesting question. They're very different. I think that in all of Le Guin's work, there is like a deep, I almost want to say happiness or like softness or a belief in life as a peaceful and beautiful thing. That just makes her book so wonderful, and she has a lot of humor and is not very interested in the individual or herself. And Tove Ditlevsen is maybe more a writer that's trapped inside her time, in some sort of patriarchy where she has to write about herself because it's the only way for her to survive. So I would say that Ursula Le Guin is writing from outside of the violence that Tove Ditlevsen is writing from in the inside. But I think that Tove Ditlevsen's sentence is what makes her survive. I think that their relationship to language is different. But they're both trying to find their footing in a tradition that really doesn't want to welcome them. And they had different strategies.
That's very interesting. I think we can end on that note. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good place for us to end. Yeah. Thank you so much, Olga, and thank you so much, Martin, for partaking in this talk. Thank you so much for Katrine for moderating and having such wonderful questions. I would also like to thank Denise from Lolli Editions for helping us to arrange this talk. The link to purchase the book is in the chat, so hopefully you will purchase it if you haven't yet. And yeah, we have a lot of interesting things coming up at Scandinavia House, a lot of virtual programming, but we also have some in-house programming starting on June 24th. We'll start a summer jazz concert in-house at Scandinavia House. So it's our first in-house program since March of 2020. So yeah, so we are opening things up again. So it's very nice to see. So again, thank you, everyone. Good luck next week with the Booker Prize. And yeah, I hope to see everyone very soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.